that season that's leading up to Jesus's ultimate demonstration of the Christ. That ultimate demonstration. We know it as the Easter season. We're in the Lenten season. People are giving up things and whatever. All we want you to give up is negative thinking, error thoughts, error consciousness. That's the only thing that we're asking that you give up. So our scripture is taken from the 26th chapter of Matthew. We actually have a couple scriptures from the 26th chapter of Matthew. And the first one, and it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said unto his disciples, then assembled together the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people, and unto the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and consulted that they might take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. That's Matthew 26, 1, 3, and 4. Let us go down to Matthew 26, 36 through 45th verses. And it came to pass when Jesus had, we lumped them all together here. Okay, there we go. Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane, and said unto the disciples, sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. Then saith unto them, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here and watch with me. And he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And he cometh unto the disciples and findeth them asleep, and saith unto Peter, what, could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away again in the second time and prayed, saying, O Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. And he left them and went away again and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then cometh he to his disciples and saith unto them, sleep now and take your rest. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed unto the hands of the sinners. That's Matthew 26, chapter 36 through 45th verses from the King James Version. Jesus had a date with destiny. He'd gone through his ministry of 3 years, and he knew that the time was now drawing near for the conclusion of it, for there to be a terminus, for there to be some sort of ultimate demonstration of all that he had taught them and showed them through healings, through miracles, through parables, through demonstrations. He'd shown them all these things, and still there was a gap. There was a disconnect as to who men thought he was, and more importantly, who men thought they were. Jesus wanted to demonstrate that there is something even beyond this thing that we call death. That there is life after life, that there is a spiritual process that is eternal. That we're not just this physical form that we find ourselves in, this human being, that we are all still unique, individualized expressions of God. There is God, that God's seed is within each and every one of us. And we know it as the Christ consciousness. And it develops, and we develop it, and we can grow it, and we can make it bloom and prosper. And just like a magnolia, if you plant a magnolia seed, it's going to grow into a magnolia tree. You plant an acorn, it's going to grow into an oak tree. You plant an orange seed, it's going to grow into an orange. We are God's seed. We're going into our God expression of who we are and whose we are. Jesus made it plain that, know ye not that ye are gods. He wanted to show that I am not the exception. I am the example. When we talk about praying in the name of Jesus, we're talking about in the way of Jesus, the way he demonstrated. The Taoism, it's following in that path. And that's what Jesus wanted us to understand, that we all have this untapped potential. Divine substance is ours to mold. But at some point, those teachings didn't sit well with the religious establishment. We know them as the Pharisees. The Pharisees were offended because Jesus' doctrine was contrary to a lot of things that they taught. They had status quo, and they had an interest in maintaining the status quo. We know that even now, people who are in power, they don't have an incentive to give up power. They're not just going to hand it over. There's a whole talk about the redistribution of wealth, that the 1% is becoming more powerful, that there's a huge dichotomy, a split between the 99% and the 1%, and that we're becoming a nation, indeed a world of have and have-nots. So anytime there's talk about redistribution of wealth, we get the things about communism and socialism, and Joe Diploma says this and Joe Diploma says that, because people have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo when they are in power, and is not willingly given up. Same was true at that time. Jesus was teaching about things that were unpopular with the religious order. But it was all good up until that point, because he was only offending the Pharisees. That was just a religious argument. So it was easily contained and held there. That's just religion. Let them do what they do. They're not offending they're not going to upset the apple cart. We have a great relationship with Rome. We can do our thing. They keep us in check, but they give us just enough lee room for us to continue to live and large the way we want to do. We got it like that. It sucks for y'all who don't have anything, but we good. But then things changed. There was another group called the Sadducees. Sadducees and Pharisees were a little different. Sadducees were more educated. They were more the elite. They were upper socioeconomic strata. They were more the ones who controlled things politically. They had the great relationship with Rome. And now Jesus became a factor to them. Before, he was just a fly in the ointment, just an annoyance. It was something that bothered the Pharisees. We don't get into these big arguments over doctrine or whatever. We're bigger than that. But when they began to see the power of Jesus to mobilize masses, when they began to see the amount of people that were actually paying attention to this message, then it became something that the Sadducees took interest in as well, because now there's a group that could be mobilized that can upset things. When we start mobilizing, people take notice. With that spring, the Arab Spring, when people began to turn to social media and began to use Twitter and Facebook and all these other platforms to start mobilizing, these little people who were considered insignificant, inconsequential, all of a sudden these students had changed the world and turned out dictators in a matter of a few months, because they began to mobilize and to share and to talk and to spread, to have conversations and dialogues and elevate their consciousness. Consider different possibilities, that just because things have been this way all this time, that we don't have to remain in the status quo, that we can change things. We have the power to do so. When people begin to realize their power, that's when the powerful take notice. This was the time that was happening right here. This was the occasion. This is what was happening in Jesus' ministry at this time. The people that in power, he had been speaking truth to power. And when you speak truth to power, you have to realize that eventually they're going to reciprocate and turn around and smack you. We've seen people who spoke truth to power and the consequences of what happened to them. Martin spoke truth to power. Malcolm spoke truth to power. Abraham Lincoln spoke truth to power. The people who have a say in something and want to do something different, Medgar Evers spoke truth to power. The people who want to change that status quo, all of a sudden, the powerful said, we're going to take you out. And that's just what happened at that time. They began to conspire as to how they can get rid of Jesus. And Jesus realized it. He began to prophesy and talk to the disciples in a different way. He stopped talking about the healings and everything, and he said that the Son of Man was about to be betrayed. Jesus knew that he had a date with destiny. He had a date with destiny. We all have dates with destiny. There comes a moment when we have to stand up for something and realize that there's a crucial crossroads that we're at. And the decision that we can make all the difference in our lives. Sometimes that date with destiny might be an exam that we're about to take. Those standardized tests that they put before us at different grade levels, and we know that if we do good on this test, we move up. If we do bad, we could be in remedial education and all this. Sometimes it's when we're taking an SAT or even a PSAT. Those are exams that can determine like the level of scholarships that you might be able to receive to colleges and things like that, your entrance into certain colleges. those can have a critical impact on your life, because if you do well on them, they allow you the opportunity to get into various schools. You have choices. Choices are big things. If you do poorly on those, then they can dictate and determine what your future options may look like. They may limit those. Nothing's going to say that you can't do it. You can do anything that you put your mind to, but there are some obstacles that may be put in your life that you don't have to deal with if you do well on those types of situations. There are job interviews that we have when we're looking, and we know that if I impress this person with my conversation, with my interaction, with my resume, with my experience, it can create opportunities for me that did not exist previously. If I impress this woman on a real date with destiny, this woman might become the person or the man that I'm interacting with that becomes my spouse. And that may determine my destiny and change my fate and align things up differently for me. Those critical moments in our lives, that we have choices, and the choices that we make can determine our destiny. Jesus was at one of those critical junctures. He had a choice to accept what was about to happen to him, or he could have turned and ran. He could have gotten away from that. But he said that now is the time to bring this all to a culmination, to bring it all to a head. Let's get it started. Let's set it off right now. He was ready to make it happen. You do what you're going to do. I'm ready. And it wasn't an easy choice. As you saw, you don't hear this often about Jesus. When you're thinking about Jesus, we often have that image of love and peace and happiness, and it's all good and whatever. But Jesus was tormented at this moment because he knew that things were about to get real up in this piece. They weren't playing around. When you're dealing with powerful folks, they can put you out. I don't know if any of you guys have ever watched House of Cards. Wonderful show if you ever get a chance to watch it. That dude, Frank Underwood, played by Kevin Spacey, is a notorious SOB. He will do whatever it takes to get power, to maintain power, to minimize those in power who are perceived to be a threat to his agenda. People are the same. They ain't changed in 2,000 years. They're the same now. People who have an agenda, if you get in their way and they have the means to break you, they will break you. And that's what Jesus was going up against. That's why he went out into the wilderness. That's why he went up there to Gethsemane and prayed 3 times. Not my will. I don't want this to happen. Not my will. I'd rather be chilling. Not my will. I got things that I could be doing. My 12 boys, we can go somewhere and, sit, fry some fish and relax. Not my will, but thine. Surrendering his destiny to the Father's will. Surrendering to a bigger purpose. You think Malcolm and Martin, there weren't other things that they could have been doing, enjoying their family, and maybe if they'd spent more time with the family, they wouldn't be in this kind of turmoil that they're in right now, because they had to abandon some fatherly duties to do a bigger purpose. Jesus took with him Peter. Metaphysically, we know that Peter, in our tradition here in Spirit, we come from a New Thought tradition. And part of that tradition states that each person in the Bible, each place in the Bible, each thing that's referenced in the Bible is actually a story about our consciousness. The story of Jesus is not about something that happened 2,000 years ago. It's not about the historical or the cultural or the social aspects of what happened then. It is about that. It is about that, but it is about so much more. And that's what metaphysics means. It's going beyond the physical, going beyond the literal and the written that's there. And how does this apply to me right now? It's great if that's all it was a good story and a good historical story, and we can learn some moral lessons from it. But what it is an ever unfolding story of our own consciousness, our own regeneration. How do we evolve and move into that Christ consciousness that Jesus was in, that space that he occupied? How do we condition ourselves to get there? So the story that we're talking about, Jesus intentionally took 3 disciples with him. We read that he took Peter. Peter represents faith. The first month, January, is about faith, because faith is the beginning of it all. But he also had with him James and John, the sons of Zebedee, we see in there, sons of thunder, James and John. James represents wisdom, and John represents love. Wisdom and love. So he took with him faith wisdom, and love as he was making a critical decision. I think that's good advice for any of us as we're considering these great situations in our lives, these great decisions that we have to make, the crossroads that we are at. To take with us faith, wisdom, and love, and allow us to make right decisions. But even those weren't enough. As we see, Jesus went away to pray, and faith, wisdom, and love went to sleep. They fell asleep not once, but twice on him. Because those attributes are wonderful. But until they have been connected and elevated and raised to the level of the Christ consciousness, they're great things, but there's still a gap there. Jesus wanted to show the elevation of the consciousness even beyond any of that. And so that's where he was at that point. That the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. You have to get through that point where you transcend and push through. The spirit was willing, but the flesh is weak. And what we're looking at now is what Jesus wanted to show is that regeneration. How do we connect those disparate elements? How do we bring the spirit and the flesh into alignment so that there is an at-one-ment, the atonement, so that we are all together, everything is working in harmony. That's where we are also. We know that there's so many things that we desire to do. There's so many things that tug at our consciousness to do, that say this would be a wonderful thing to do. We hear those things. We have those things. We have those intentions. But how often do we follow through and carry through to the full, to optimization of how often do we do all that we know that we have the power to do? The scriptures are all about us being in harmony and balance. And these are ancient truths that are not just limited to our understanding of this Judeo-Christian tradition. The Buddhists talk about it, the Hindu, everybody talks about yin and yang, and how do we bring harmony and balance? The male and the female, the masculine and the feminine, these energies, the left and the right brain, if you want to get contemporary with it. How do we get the rational and the emotive working together? And that's what Jesus was connecting and showing, that there is no separation between the two. There is no disconnect. There is all one. And until we have those energies, those 12 spiritual faculties working in conjunction, until we can utilize all of our energies, we are incomplete. There still needs to be that elevation. We all have dates with destiny. There's something that's coming up for somebody, some divine appointment, where it's all going to be laid on the line. Maybe it's an opportunity to pitch a business. Maybe it's an opportunity to create something that you're working on. There's a product that's within you. There's a purpose that is within you. Don't let it die. Don't give up on it. Don't let it fall asleep. Inject it with that vitality. Inject it with life. Inject it with that Christ consciousness that can infuse and elevate it to a level that can transcend and make a dent in the universe and change things. Each one of us is endowed with that power. The universe can be better because of something that you do. Something that you do. Only you. Unique to you. That you can do. That can change things. You are given a God-given power to shape and create. The creation story that we read in Genesis is really a model for how we create as well. God spoke, and it happened. God spoke it into creation. There are two creation stories. If you read, there's the beginning where he speaks it, and then you go back, and then there's where he materializes it. There's where he speaks man into existence, and then there's where he shapes him with the clay and actually makes man. That tells us that each of our situations begin when we speak it, when we internalize it, and we have the thought and consciousness, and then when we make it happen through our actions. God said, let there be light. And then he made the bodies that actually could illumine. So how could there be light before there was the sun and the moon and the stars that were placed into the firmament? Because the concept comes first. That's why we say think a new thought. If you don't like the experience that you're having, you can create a new thought, create a new experience. Now, I talked about these dates with destiny and how they can be the crossroads. Robert Frost talked about two roads diverging in a wood, and he took the path less traveled, and that made all the difference. There's these divergent points that can happen in our lives. But the blessed thing is, when you are a true student, you don't have to get caught up in the woulda, shoulda, couldas, because that can happen as well. I should have taken that path, or I should have taken this path. Well, what would have happened if I'd done that? And you can destroy yourself with that, going back and second guessing. Know that if you are at a critical juncture, it's all in divine order. All things work together for good, them that love God and according to his purpose. All things work together. So if you choose a path, and at some point it feels like you made a wrong decision, know even then you made the right decision. Because there was something about that path that you needed to go down. There was something in that path that you needed to encounter. There was some lesson that you needed to learn. Even if you call this situation good or bad, I used to be this, I used to have this, and now all of a sudden, what happened? I don't know. You needed to learn something from that lesson. You needed to take something from it. Maybe you were too arrogant. Maybe you were too proud. Maybe you needed to be able to relate to those who are going through something. There was some reason for betterment for you that happened as a consequence of that experience. Why did she leave me? Why was I fired? Why did this happen? Why did this accident happen at this time? There was some lesson. If you look at life from that perspective, there's always optimistic. When you look at what could have happened, it leads you to insanity. Know that we have dates with destiny, but as true students, we can set the appointment. We can set the time. We control our calendar. Every day is a day with destiny, a date with destiny. Every day we can create a new experience. Every day we can change what's happening in our lives. Every day we have a new opportunity. Every day we can create a new experience by having a new thought. Every day. Every moment of every day. We don't have to be satisfied with where we are and complacent and say, I can't do anything else. You can change it. The date with destiny is when you set the appointment. Put it in your calendar. Put it in your phone. Program it in your iPad. It's now. Put it in iCal, Entourage, whatever. You determine the date of your destiny. That is the power that God has given you. Power and dominion over your thoughts. Power and dominion over your thoughts leads to power and dominion over your experience. You can't necessarily change what's happening around you, but you can most certainly change how you allow it to affect you. You can change your reaction to a response. You don't have to do what the world wants you to do. And that was what was happening with Jesus. The Pharisees were representing that consciousness of doctrine and law and dogma and what we say and litigation and legality. They had missed the spirit and the essence of the law, which was love. The Sadducees were representing political power and influence and those things. The things that Jesus rejected when he was taken into the wilderness for his temptation. He rejected all those things because those things emanate from a world consciousness, a race consciousness that says you got to get yours and I'll get mine, that there's competitiveness. There's the crab theory that each man for himself. There's limited resources. There's limited access to the resources. If you get yours, you're denying me the opportunity to get mine. And that's why we compete and we battle. We create us versus them, we versus they. But we all have access to infinite abundance. And when we come from that perspective that there is no separation, what happens to the least of them also happens to me. I can't do unto them. I can't dog them out. I can't harm them because in essence I am harming myself. And that's what Jesus talked about when he said, love thy neighbor as thyself. That if you love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy mind and all thy soul, and you love thy neighbor as yourself, you've encapsulated all the law. All the scripture. Everything rests upon those two things. You do that, forget about everything else. You've covered it already. You've done it. You have a date with destiny. What are you going to pencil in? What are you going to line up? You're going to have your person call their person and set it up. Make a difference. Your difference makes a difference for us all. There is no separation. There is no disconnect. What happens to one of us happens to all. Jesus showed us that even to the point of death, that was all for a purpose as well. If that's all they can do to you, why fear it? You have a date with destiny. 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 Yes. The world changes. I love you all. Peace and blessings.